Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to grow old without anyone to rely on? No children, no spouse, no family, just you navigating life on your own. It's a thought that most of us try to avoid, but the reality is that more and more people are facing this very situation. We call them elder orphans, and it's becoming a growing concern in our society. In today's video, we're diving deep into what it means to be an elder orphan, whether you're aging alone or have family nearby. This is a reality that could affect you or someone you love sooner than you think. Why? Because even if you're not there yet, the trends show that many more of us will find ourselves in this position as family structures continue to fracture and life expectancy rises. By the end of this video, you'll understand why we need to talk about this issue now, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. You will hear real-life experiences, alarming statistics, and practical steps you can take today to prepare for tomorrow. Plus, we'll discuss how to protect your health, maintain your independence, and keep your peace of mind as you age, even without the traditional support systems in place. Stay with me until the end, because the solutions we explore could be life-changing, offering hope and preparation for the future. You don't want to miss this. Your future self may thank you for it. If you are not subscribed, I recommend subscribing and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Your support means a lot to me. And if you enjoyed this video, you can help me continue spreading the valuable lessons by liking and sharing it. Being an elder orphan is something that has quietly existed throughout history, a reality faced by many in silence. Yet today, we are witnessing an undeniable surge in this heartbreaking phenomenon, and it's impossible to ignore the gravity of it any longer. It's not just a footnote in discussions about aging. It's becoming a central issue as more and more people find themselves growing old, completely alone. In the vast sea of research I've dived into, article after article, study after study, and expert after expert, all point to the same concerning trend. We are facing an elder orphan crisis. And the most terrifying part of it all is that our society, especially here in the United States, is woefully ill-prepared to deal with it. We lack the infrastructure, the compassion, and the comprehensive safety net that would be needed to protect the most vulnerable among us. We've built a society that prizes individualism, but in the process, we've neglected to create a system that ensures no one is left behind when they reach their final, most fragile years. This reality is not just concerning, it is deeply disturbing. Let me bring it closer to home by sharing my personal story. Currently, I'm fortunate enough to live in low-income senior housing. It's affordable, and for now, I'm able to maintain some semblance of independence. I wake up every day feeling thankful that I have a place to call home. But beneath that gratitude lies a constant, gnawing fear. What happens if my health starts to fail? What happens when I can no longer manage on my own, when simple tasks become too difficult to handle by myself? The truth is that I wouldn't be able to afford the level of care I would need. Assisted living or any kind of more intensive medical care is simply beyond my financial reach. The likely scenario is that I would end up in a nursing home where my monthly Social Security check, everything I've worked for my entire life, would go directly to the facility. Yes, they would meet my basic needs: food, shelter, medical attention. But is that a life? Is that how I want to live out my final years? Confined in a place where I'm just another number, another body to care for? This is the harsh reality that people like me face every day. The thought of it weighs heavily on my heart, and I know I'm not alone in these fears. Most people my age, I'm 69, are not prepared for what's coming. We didn't plan for this. Many of us didn't even realize we needed to plan for this because the world we grew up in seemed so different. Now, as we approach the years when we will need help the most, we find that the help we need simply isn't there. It's terrifying to think that in the twilight of our lives, we are more vulnerable than ever. Yet society has largely turned a blind eye to the looming crisis. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. The statistics paint a grim picture. According to AARP, approximately 12% of people age 50 and over are considered elder orphans. That's not just a small percentage. It represents millions of individuals. Millions of people are facing the terrifying prospect of growing old alone, without the safety net of family to catch them when they fall. The number is steadily growing as our population ages, as family structures fracture, and as more and more of us find ourselves without children or estranged from the family we do have. The traditional family unit, which once provided a built-in support system, is no longer the reliable safety net it once was. Even for those who do have children, the reality is often not much better. Estrangement, geographical distance, or strained relationships can leave people just as isolated as if they had no family at all. Having children doesn't guarantee that they will be there when you need them. Life gets in the way, people grow apart, and suddenly you realize you're navigating the challenges of aging on your own. It's a kind of loneliness that is profound, a kind of loneliness that seeps into every aspect of your life as you face the inevitable decline of your body and mind without the comfort of a familiar hand to hold. And this is becoming the reality for more and more of us as the years go by. When I think about how things used to be, it's hard not to feel a sense of loss. I think back to my mother's time, growing up during the Great Depression and into the 1940s. Life wasn't easy back then either. Far from it. But there was a different mentality, a different spirit of community that seems to have all but disappeared today. Back then, family wasn't just something you were born into. It was something that expanded beyond bloodlines. Family meant your neighbors, your friends, the people in your community. It meant looking out for one another, no matter what. My mother would often tell me stories of how her family took in people who weren't even blood relatives. If someone in the community was struggling, no job, no food, no place to stay, they would live with you until they got back on their feet. No one questioned it because that's just how things were. There was a sense of shared responsibility, a collective understanding that we are all in this together. That kind of community safety net provided a level of security that many of us today can only dream of. It wasn't perfect, but it was there. People knew that if they fell on hard times, they wouldn't face it alone. That sense of community, of shared humanity, has eroded over the years, replaced by a society that values individualism above all else. Now, we're expected to fend for ourselves, to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, even in situations where it's clear that no one can do it alone. And as we grow older, that isolation becomes even more pronounced. The connections we once had, whether with family, friends, or our communities, start to fade, and what we're left with is a terrifying void. I've seen this shift firsthand, and it's heartbreaking. Today, so many of us are aging in a society that no longer values the wisdom, experience, or contributions of the elderly. We are marginalized, pushed to the sidelines, and expected to quietly fade away. There is little understanding or empathy for the unique challenges we face as we age. And without the social structures to support us, many of us find ourselves staring down a future that is uncertain at best and bleak at worst. What's especially troubling is that this crisis is only going to get worse. As the baby boomer generation continues to age, the number of elder orphans will skyrocket. We are facing a tidal wave of loneliness and isolation, and yet our social systems remain woefully inadequate to meet the demand. There are not enough resources, not enough affordable housing, not enough care facilities, and certainly not enough community support to ensure that everyone can age with dignity. And dignity is what it all comes down to, isn't it? We all want to live out our final years with a sense of dignity, with the knowledge that we are cared for and valued. But for so many of us, that feels like an unattainable dream. The thought of spending my last years in a cold, impersonal nursing home, where my every movement is monitored and controlled, where I'm just another body in a bed, is almost too much to bear. I don't want to be reduced to that, and I know so many others feel the same way. What we need is a complete rethinking of how we approach aging in this country. We need stronger social safety nets, more affordable housing options, and a greater sense of community responsibility. We need to bring back that sense of shared humanity, that understanding that we are all connected. and that we all have a role to play in taking care of one another. Aging should not be something to fear, but for too many of us, it is. It's a looming shadow, a constant reminder of the vulnerability we will face as we grow older without the support we need. In the end, being an elder orphan is more than just a label. It's a lived reality for millions of people. And unless we start addressing it with the urgency and compassion it deserves, that number will continue to grow. The question we must all ask ourselves is this: what kind of society do we want to be? One that leaves its elders to fend for themselves in their most vulnerable years, or one that ensures no one has to face the hardships of aging alone? The choice is ours to make, but the time to act is now. Fast forward to today, and that once reliable safety net has all but vanished, particularly here in the United States. We've drifted away from the sense of community and collective responsibility that used to bind us together. Instead, we have become more isolated, more consumed by the ideals of individualism, and less willing or able to extend our hands to those who need it most, especially the elderly. In many cultures around the world, the care and support of aging family members remains an integral part of daily life. In places like Japan, India, or Latin America, there is still a deeply ingrained sense of duty and honor in caring for one's aging parents or older relatives. It's not just expected. It's cherished as an opportunity to give back to those who raised and nurtured you. Yet here in the U.S., it's often viewed as a burden, an inconvenience, or something that's simply not my problem. It's a sad and troubling shift in our cultural values, and it reflects a growing disconnection from the very people who shape the world we live in today. I can't help but look back at my own life and compare it to the way things used to be. When I was growing up in the 1950s and 60s, I don't recall hearing much about older people being abandoned or having nowhere to go. Part of that was because people didn't live as long back then. The advances in modern medicine have certainly increased life expectancy, and while that's a positive achievement, it also brings new challenges. A longer life often means a longer period of needing care, something many of us never anticipated. Back then, we didn't see the same level of homelessness among older adults that we do now. It was a rare thing to hear about an elderly person living on the streets. But today, the statistics are grim. Recent studies show that a significant portion of the homeless population is over 50 years old. And it's not just due to issues like addiction or mental health, though those factors play a role. What we're increasingly seeing is older adults who have simply outlived their resources, outlived their support systems, and now find themselves alone and vulnerable in ways that society isn't prepared to address. So, what are we left with? A growing number of people over 50 are facing a future without the financial safety nets, family connections, or even close partners and friends that might have once been there to help them through the difficult times. Many of us are living alone, and for a while, that's manageable if you're healthy, if you're mobile, if you're independent. But what happens when those things start to fade? When does your health begin to decline? When you can no longer take care of yourself? Or even when the simple act of getting out of bed becomes a monumental task? This is the reality that elder orphans face every single day. For those of us who fall into this category, the future can be a terrifying unknown. I try to take care of myself as best as I can. I focus on maintaining my health, staying active, and doing everything in my power to prolong my independence. But there's always that lingering fear in the back of my mind. What happens if I fall? What happens if I get sick and can't recover on my own? The hard truth is that I might end up in a long-term care facility, and that's not how I want to spend the final years of my life. The idea of being in a nursing home, where I'm just one of many patients, where my every move is monitored, and where my autonomy is stripped away, it's a thought that fills me with dread. And I know I'm not alone in feeling that way. The reality is that many of us will face this exact situation, whether we're ready for it or not. It's not an easy thing to talk about, but it's a conversation that needs to happen. The number of people aging alone is growing, and as a society, we are failing to address it. We haven't built the systems, the policies, or the communities needed to support our elders as they face the natural, yet challenging, process of aging. In the past, you could rely on your family, your neighbors, or your community to be there for you when things got tough. But today, too many of us are going through life isolated, disconnected from the people and the networks that could provide comfort and care in our most vulnerable years. The saddest part is that this isolation often happens gradually. You might be living independently, doing just fine, but as time goes on, the people around you slowly start to disappear. Friends move away. Family members become distant or preoccupied with their own lives, and before you know it, you're left alone with fewer and fewer people to rely on. Even those who do have children or family nearby can find themselves effectively orphaned by circumstances. Estranged relationships, busy schedules, or geographical distance can all mean that when you need help the most, it just isn't there. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. For me, the best I can do is to keep moving forward, to keep taking care of myself, and to hope that when the time comes, I won't have to spend years in a long-term care facility before I die. It's not a pleasant thought, but it's a reality that many of us have to confront. We can't escape the passage of time, and we can't always control what happens as we age. But what we can do is start having these conversations now, and start pushing for the kinds of changes that will ensure the next generation doesn't have to face these same fears and uncertainties. We need to rebuild the safety nets that once existed, to create a society where aging doesn't mean you're cast aside, forgotten, or left to fend for yourself. We need to create stronger communities, where people look out for one another and where the elderly are valued for the wisdom and experience they bring. Most importantly, we need to recognize that aging isn't something that happens in isolation. It's a shared experience, and it's something that affects all of us, whether we realize it now or not. The reality of elder orphans is a wake-up call for all of us. It's a reminder that while we may prize independence, we also need to value connection, care, and compassion. We need to rethink what it means to grow old in this country and make sure that no one has to face their later years alone, scared, and without the support they deserve. Because one day, each of us will find ourselves in that same place, looking around and hoping that someone, somewhere, will be there to lend a hand when we need it most. And the question we need to ask ourselves now is, what kind of world do we want to create for our elders and ourselves when that time comes? The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services reports a staggering statistic. 77% of people over the age of 50 have not made any concrete plans for their old age. This means no living will, no power of attorney, and no long-term care strategy in place. It's a sobering reality, considering that 70% of us will inevitably need some form of long-term care as we age, whether it's help with daily tasks like bathing, dressing, or eating, or more comprehensive, full-time care in a facility. The likelihood of developing conditions like Alzheimer's or other debilitating diseases makes this even more concerning. But the lack of planning isn't because people are careless or irresponsible. In many cases, it's because the idea of facing these uncomfortable truths is overwhelming. I know I've been guilty of avoiding it too, pushing these thoughts to the back of my mind, telling myself that I'm okay now, and hoping that things won't change anytime soon. But the truth is, I know how quickly everything could change. The uncertainty looms. And the fear of facing that uncertainty without the safety net of family or financial stability is terrifying. So, what can we do about this looming crisis? It's easy to feel powerless, but the first step is to take control of the things we can. For me, that starts with taking care of my health. It's one of the few areas where we still have some agency, and it's something I've been working on. My main health concern right now is losing weight, and while it's been a slow journey, I know that even small improvements in my physical health can make a big difference in the long run. I try to walk regularly, doing what exercises I can that are suited for someone my age. I also watch what I eat, being mindful of my diet, but I'm fully aware that no matter how well I take care of myself, there are no guarantees. Health can change in an instant, no matter how much effort we put into preserving it. That's why it's so essential to prepare while we still have control, to make the decisions that will protect us when we no longer can do so ourselves. Beyond the physical aspect, the emotional and social side of aging is just as crucial. The National Institutes of Health has identified 3 major concerns that specifically affect elder orphans: loneliness, chronic health conditions, and mental health issues like depression and anxiety. Loneliness, thankfully, isn't something that weighs too heavily on me. I've always been a bit of a loner by nature, so living alone doesn't feel like a burden to me the way it might to others. But I'm acutely aware that for many people in my situation, the isolation of aging alone can be utterly devastating. The emotional toll of having no one to turn to and no one to share the small moments with can lead to feelings of deep despair. And while I may be content with my solitude now, I know that could change in the future. For those facing this kind of isolation, having some form of social connection, even if it isn't through family, is crucial. Friendships, no matter how casual, can serve as a lifeline. Staying engaged with others, whether it's through a church group, community activities, or simply having a regular phone call with a friend, can stave off the mental and emotional toll of being alone. It's not always easy to maintain social connections as we age. People move, relationships change, and life gets in the way. But making the effort to nurture these connections is vital. They provide not just companionship, but also emotional support, a sense of belonging, and a reminder that we are not completely alone in this journey. In addition to the social aspects, mental health is another area that can't be overlooked. The longer we live in isolation, the more vulnerable we become to depression and anxiety. It's not just the physical challenges of aging that wear us down. It's the emotional and psychological strain as well. Without regular interaction with others, without someone to share our thoughts and experiences with, it's easy to fall into a spiral of loneliness and despair. Even those of us who think we are fine alone may, at some point, realize we need the presence of others, even if it's just for the small comforts they bring. The fear of being alone, of aging without a support system, and of potentially facing years of poor health is something many of us wrestle with daily. It's a reality that has become increasingly common as the fabric of family and community life in the U.S. has shifted. We're no longer living in multi-generational households where care for the elderly is a natural part of life. In many other cultures, taking care of aging parents or relatives is considered a privilege, a way to honor those who raised you. But here in the U.S., there's been a stark cultural shift. Caring for the elderly is often seen as a burden, something to be avoided or outsourced to professionals whenever possible. That shift in mindset has left many people, like me, without the traditional safety net of family support. I find myself thinking back to earlier generations, when people didn't live as long and the need for long-term care wasn't as pressing. When I was growing up in the 1950s and 60s, it was rare to hear about elderly people being left to fend for themselves. People didn't live into their 80s or 90s as commonly as they do today, and with shorter life expectancies, there was less time to need extensive medical or personal care. But as modern medicine has extended our lifespans, it has also extended the period in which many of us will need help. And that's something we weren't prepared for, individually or as a society. The growing number of older adults without the means to care for themselves is leading to alarming trends, including an increase in homelessness among seniors. It's heartbreaking to think that so many people have outlived their resources and now find themselves on the streets, abandoned by a system that wasn't built to accommodate their needs. So, where does that leave us? For many of us over 50, we're facing an uncertain future without the financial means, the family connections, or the close support systems that previous generations relied on. It's a lonely and frightening reality, but it's one we have to confront head-on. The best thing we can do is take steps to protect ourselves now, while we still have the ability to do so. That means not just taking care of our physical health, but also making those uncomfortable plans for the future. Drafting living wills, assigning power of attorney, and thinking seriously about what kind of care we might need and how we'll access it. It means accepting that while we can't control everything, we can control some things, and we owe it to ourselves to do whatever we can to ensure our future is as secure as possible. It's not an easy journey, and there are no guarantees. But by taking proactive steps, both physically and mentally, we can give ourselves a better chance of aging with dignity and peace, even if we don't have the traditional safety nets to rely on. And while it's not always easy to face the uncomfortable truths about what lies ahead, it's necessary. Because in the end, the most frightening thing isn't the possibility of getting older. It's the possibility of doing so unprepared and alone. Then there's the issue of mental health, a topic that becomes even more pressing as we age. The older we get, the more prone we are to depression, anxiety, and a host of other mental health challenges that can take a significant toll on our overall well-being. It's a vicious cycle, really. Mental health declines, and in turn, so does physical health. The two are deeply intertwined, and when one starts to slip, the other often follows. I've lived with anxiety for most of my life, so I know firsthand the struggles it can bring. While my anxiety hasn't necessarily worsened with age, it's something I've had to learn to manage constantly. I know I'm fortunate in that respect, but for others, depression can become a serious, life-altering issue, especially as they age. It's not just about feeling sad. It can lead to a complete withdrawal from life, a loss of interest in things that once brought joy, and even neglect of basic needs like eating, bathing, or taking medications. That neglect can spiral into a dangerous decline, both mentally and physically, and it's a trap that far too many people fall into. So, what can you do if you're staring down the prospect of being an elder orphan, possibly facing these challenges alone? The most important thing, in my opinion, is to resist the pull of despair. I know that sounds easier said than done, but I truly believe that maintaining hope and a positive attitude can make a world of difference, even when things seem overwhelming. It's so easy to let your mind spiral into worst-case scenarios, to picture yourself abandoned, living in poverty, or wasting away in a nursing home for years on end. I've had those thoughts myself. There have been nights when I've laid awake, worrying about what my life will look like in 10, 20, or 30 years. Will I still be able to care for myself? Will I end up in a facility, forgotten, waiting out my final days? These kinds of thoughts can quickly become all-consuming, and before you know it, you're trapped in a cycle of catastrophic thinking. But there are ways to manage that kind of thinking. One thing that's helped me is a psychological technique called thought stopping. It's a simple but powerful tool. When you feel your mind spiraling into negative thoughts, when those worst-case scenarios start to play on a loop, you literally tell yourself, stop. You say it out loud, if necessary, to interrupt the flow of negativity. Then, you consciously shift your focus to something you can control. Instead of dwelling on all the things that could go wrong in the future, ask yourself, what can I do today? You may not be able to control what happens down the road, but there are steps you can take right now to care for yourself. Maybe that means creating a living will, so that your wishes are clear if something happens. Maybe it means looking into long-term care insurance if you can afford it, or just researching what options are out there. Or maybe it's as simple as reaching out to a friend, making sure you stay connected, so you're not isolating yourself. One thing I've learned is that social connection is vital, especially as we age. Loneliness can be devastating, and for elder orphans, it's a real and constant threat. It's easy to retreat into isolation, especially if your family is distant or non-existent. But having even a small circle of friends can make a huge difference. These relationships provide emotional support, give you a reason to stay engaged with life, and can even help you in practical ways if you ever need it. I try to maintain those connections as best I can, even though I tend to be more introverted by nature. It's not always easy, but it's worth the effort. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Another thing to consider, especially for those of us aging alone, is the joy and comfort a pet can bring. Studies have repeatedly shown that having a pet, whether it's a dog, cat, or even something smaller, can improve both mental and physical health. Pets provide companionship, which can be incredibly important as you get older. They offer unconditional love, they give you a sense of purpose, and they keep you active. I have a neighbor who's in his 70s, and despite his serious health issues, he's still going strong, largely because of his dog. That dog is his lifeline. It's the reason he gets up every morning. He walks that dog and cares for it. And in return, it gives him something that no medication or therapy could, a sense of purpose. And that's something we all need, especially as we face the challenges of aging. I know the idea of taking on the responsibility of a pet might seem daunting, especially if you're already feeling overwhelmed by your health concerns. But the rewards are undeniable. Having something to care for, something that depends on you, can make you feel needed, which is something that often fades as we age. For many older adults, pets provide not only companionship, but also a reason to stay active and engage with the world around them. Whether it's taking a dog for a walk, playing with a cat, or simply having a pet to curl up with at night, it can be a powerful antidote to loneliness and despair. At the end of the day, the prospect of being an elder orphan, of aging alone without the traditional support systems of family or close friends, is undeniably frightening, but it's not insurmountable. There are things we can do to prepare, both practically and emotionally. We can take care of our health, plan for the future, stay connected with others, and perhaps even bring a little joy and companionship into our lives through a pet. It's not about pretending that everything will be fine or ignoring the challenges that lie ahead. It's about facing those challenges with a clear head and an open heart, knowing that while we may not have all the answers, we still have the power to shape our future in meaningful ways. In the end, I believe that aging well is about more than just avoiding illness or staying physically active. It's about finding ways to maintain hope, connection, and purpose, even in the face of uncertainty. Whether it's through friendships, pets, or simply the act of taking care of ourselves, we can find strength in the small things that bring us joy and comfort. And in doing so, we can navigate the challenges of aging with grace, resilience, and most importantly, hope. As we've explored the challenges of aging, especially for those of us who might find ourselves without the traditional support of family, it's clear that facing these realities requires strength, preparation, and hope. Now, I'd like to ask you, what have you learned from this discussion so far? Has anything resonated with you or inspired you to think differently about how you approach aging? Please share in the comments one thing you've learned and will bring into practice in your life going forward. If you found value in this video, please take a moment to leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your engagement helps us continue to bring important conversations like this to the forefront. Thank you for watching, and let's continue supporting one another on this journey of life.